This character means cannot when it's used alone, and it's contained in all 10 of these. Dusk, a curtain, a model, to touch, to admire, the desert, a grave. 10 characters you'd normally memorize one by one, but they're all built from one underlying concept, and by the end of this video, you won't need to memorize any of them. You'll be able to derive their meaning. If you've ever studied Chinese characters, or kanji, if you came from Japanese, you've heard that characters are built from components called radicals. The standard story goes, one radical tells you the domain, the other marks the sound. Take mo as an example. On the left is the water component, a picture of a thing, so I'll call it the pictogram radical. It tells you that mo belongs to the water domain. On the right is the mo character, which the textbook says is only there to mark the mo sound. But hold on, why is there a water radical in a character whose meaning is a land with no water at all? Here's what that story leaves out. Mo isn't just a sound marker. It stands for a concept, to cover. Now watch the desert assemble itself. Water plus cover. The water is covered over, veiled away. A land whose water is hidden, that is, desert. Once the missing meaning is in place, the water radical mystery resolves naturally. And it does not stop there. The character for dusk, mu, is to cover plus sun, the sun being veiled. The character for grave, mu, is to cover plus earth, earth that covers. Same concept, landing in domain after domain. That's how most so-called phonetic radicals actually work, an abstract concept at the core, and around it a whole family of characters, each one the concept landing in a different domain. Learn one concept, and you unlock the family. Learn a few families, and you start to see the logic Chinese itself is built on. That's the radical composition method, and it's what this channel is about. Now we will illustrate this method by going through the mo family, one character at a time. Let's begin with mo, the character for dusk or sunset. As we already saw, to cover plus the sun being veiled, which is dusk. The ancient form of the pictogram for the sun is displayed above the character to help you learn this pictogram more easily, and notice the flavor. In the mo family, a number of characters have the sense of things hidden through covering, veiled away. Mu is one of them. We will cover other examples next. Now, let's go through a few compound words for mu. 日暮, the same meaning as mu alone, with the sun spelled out explicitly.
日暮西山.
That literally reads, the sun setting behind the western hills. The figurative meaning is someone or something in their declining stage, their vitality veiled away. Next, mu, the character for curtain. The composition is to cover plus cloth, cloth that veils things which is a curtain. Mu forms many compound words, and in many of them the curtain is figurative, with the sense that something is veiled and hidden. For example, ne mu, inside the curtain. The meaning is the inside information hidden from outsiders. It often carries a negative shade, as in insider trading. Mu ho, behind the curtain, meaning behind the scenes, not publicly visible. Kai mu, opening the curtain, meaning the opening of an event, unveiling what was hidden. Notice that understanding mu as covering not only helps you decode the character mu itself, it also helps you understand why all the compound words above share this veiled sense. Now, the character for grave, mu. The composition is to cover plus earth, earth that covers, which is a grave. Notice that the grave also carries the veil sense, the deceased, veiled away, not to be seen in the living world. In ancient China, there were two words for the grave, fei and mu. Mu is the flat burial, the earth that covers the dead level with the ground. Fei is the mound raised above it. Notice that fei uses a different phonetic radical, ben, which means to bulge out. So fei is earth that bulges out. We will cover that family in a later video. In modern Chinese, the distinction between fei and mu is lost. They are used interchangeably, and mu can be used as a compound word, meaning the grave. Last in this segment, mo, the character for desert. We already derived this one in the introduction. The composition is water plus to cover, water veiled, which is a desert. Let's look at a few compound words that use mo. 沙漠 is the modern way of saying desert. It literally says sand desert. The character for sand, 沙, is composed of water and a character meaning little or less. Notice that in 沙漠, 沙 and 漠 describe the same concept through parallel logic. 沙 says there is little water. 漠 says the water is veiled and hidden. Next is 冷漠, which means indifference, the warmth and caring veiled away. And finally, 漠视, to ignore, the sight is veiled. Notice that in 冷漠 and 漠视, the character 漠 does not mean the literal desert at all, but the veiling sense remains present. At this point, you may be wondering, why do these characters mu, 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 mo sound the same or similar to each other? This is the phonetic radical mo doing its job. Characters that contain a phonetic radical have the same or similar pronunciation as the phonetic radical itself. So the phonetic radical mo is giving you two things at once: a shared underlying meaning across the family of characters that contain it, and approximately their pronunciation. This is why studying characters grouped by phonetic radicals can be so efficient. You unlock the meaning of an entire family of characters and their pronunciation in a single batch. Now, note that a phonetic radical only marks the sound approximately. For some characters, the pronunciation is exactly that of the phonetic radical. More often than not, they differ somewhat. The reason is that, like any language, Chinese has gone through sound shifts over more than 1,000 years. So the sounds of characters and their phonetic radicals have drifted apart. That said, the phonetic radical remains a reliable guide. It puts you in the right neighborhood of a character's pronunciation. We will have more to say about the phonetic radical's dual role of meaning and sound later in the video. Let's look at a couple more mo family characters that involve the covering concept without the hidden away sense. First, mo, the character for membrane. The composition is flesh plus cover, the thing that covers flesh. In the body, a thin tissue covers every muscle and knits the flesh together. That covering tissue is what mo originally meant, the membrane. One note about the flesh pictogram radical. This is not the moon radical, though they look almost identical. A rule of thumb is when this shape appears on the left side of a character, it is usually the flesh radical. In modern use, mo often means a biological membrane, a sense inherited from its original meaning. For example, 细胞膜, the cell membrane, the thin layer that encloses everything inside a cell. Next, 耳膜, the eardrum, the membrane that seals the ear canal. And finally, 薄膜, a thin film that wraps over a surface which does not need to be biological at all. Next, mu, the character for recruiting and for collecting. The composition is to cover plus force, to cover with force. Every use of mu carries the same sense. Casting a net to cover a wide area through effort and bring in whatever is covered and caught. That is mu, to recruit, to solicit, to collect. For example, 募集, to raise, to gather funds, signatures, ideas. The collecting effort covers as wide a field as possible. Next, 募捐, to solicit donations. The appeal covers a great many people and takes in what each of them gives. Then there is 募兵, to levy soldiers, sweeping through an area to bring in the men within. And finally, 招募, to recruit, to hire. When you recruit, your effort involves casting a wide net to cover many candidates. Last, from to cover, an extended operation arises. to cover and take form. Let's go through the characters built on this extended meaning. First, mo, the character for a mold or a model. The composition is wood plus to cover, wood that gets covered. To see why, watch how ancient bronze casting worked. First, carve a mo, a solid master, usually of wood, in the shape of the intended object. Then press a thick block of soft clay onto each side of the mo, covering it, the clay taking the shape of the mo. This clay covering has a name of its own, the fan. Remove the fan, close them into a hollow mold, and pour in the bronze. The cast comes out in the shape of the mo. Now notice how the covering action relates to shape taking. To cover a thing well, the covering must follow its every contour. Covering closely is, itself, taking the shape of something. Casting simply puts this general mechanism to work, and the mo is the thing that is covered so that its own shape can be taken. The mold, and from there, the model. In compounds, 模范, the mo and the fan, the two objects of the casting process. Together, they mean a template. From there, it came to mean exemplary, because the template is what everyone is expected to align with. Then there is 模型, a model, a small copy that repeats a thing's shape. And finally, 模仿, to imitate, to take another's form. In all of these, mo acts as the template. Its shape is taken, even though the physical covering mechanism is gone. Next, mo built on the very same mechanism, cover and take form. The composition is to cover plus the hand. This time it is the hand actively doing the covering and shape-taking action. That is mo, to trace. The literal case is 临摹, tracing a masterwork. A semi-transparent sheet is laid over the model and written upon. The sheet covers what is being copied, and the hand takes the shape beneath it. Next, 摹刻, to trace and carve. A piece of calligraphy is covered and traced just as before. Then the tracing itself is laid over the stone where the shape it is carved out, covering twice in a row, first to take the shape, then to give it. 摹 can also be used figuratively, the hand feeling out a shape. 描摹, to depict, to trace a thing's shape in lines or in words. Either way, the hand performs the same action, cover and take form. Next, 摸, to touch, to feel. The composition is the hand plus to cover, exactly the same two components as 摸. The hand looks a little different here than on the previous page. When it stands on the left side of a character, it takes its slimmed-down radical form. And indeed, 摸 began as just a different way of writing 摸, the same word with the same meaning, to trace. In modern use, the meaning of the two characters has diverged. 摸 means to touch. The hand covering a surface is touching it. 抚摸, to stroke, to caress, touching at its gentlest. But the original cover and take form sense lives on inside compounds of the 摸 character. 摸清事实, to feel out the facts, to keep your hand moving over the matter until its shape comes clear. And 摸索, to feel one's way, moving forward by touch, tracing what cannot yet be seen. Notice that English uses the expression to feel out a situation, from the same logic of the hand over the thing, taking its shape. And finally, 摸, cover and take form in the domain of the mind. The composition is to cover, plus the heart, the mind. The heart covers a target to take its form. The original meaning is to emulate. The mind lays itself over someone, the way the clay lay over the 摸, and takes their ways of doing things. From there, an extended sense, to long for. The mind presses itself over the target object and is shaped by what it covers. In compounds, 羡慕, to envy, to admire. You long to become the other person. Next, 爱慕, adoring longing. The heart pressed close over the one it loves. And finally, 倾慕, 亲 means to lean. The heart tipping toward the one it longs for. Everything we have seen in the mo family is one instance of a general radical composition model. Let's lay it out. In the most common case, a character is composed of two parts, a pictogram radical and another radical that carries an abstract meaning. We will call it the abstract radical. The character's meaning comes from composing the two. The abstract meaning is applied to the domain that the pictogram stands for. In the mo character, to cover applied to water, water veiled. For pronunciation, the two parts behave differently. The pictogram radical is not voiced. The abstract radical is often voiced. Voiced means the character's pronunciation is the same as or similar to that of the voiced radical. Similar more often than the same because sounds have shifted over the centuries. When an abstract radical is voiced, it acts as a phonetic radical, the part that hints at the character's pronunciation. Let's pause for a moment on that unvoiced pictogram radical. Mo is not read as shui mo. It is read simply as mo. The shui component is silent, even though it contributes meaning. This is radically different from a phonetic writing system, and it is not unique to the Chinese script. Sumerian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphs have a closely parallel mechanism called determinatives, symbols that add meaning but are not spoken. The parallels between cuneiform and the Chinese and the Japanese writing systems run deep. That is a story for a later video. From this common case, let's map out the other types of radical composition. First, pictogram plus pictogram, meaning the sun and the moon together, bright, xiu, a person leaning against a tree to rest. This is the classic semantic composition that textbooks teach. Ironically, it is a very small class. Pictogram radicals stand for concrete objects, and composing an object with another object only occasionally lands on a useful meaning. Composing an abstract concept with a concrete domain, on the other hand, is the productive mechanism. And this is why characters built from an abstract radical plus a pictogram radical are the case that dominates. Also note, in Ming and Xiu, neither of their components is voiced. The character's pronunciation is unrelated to their components. Second, composing two abstract radicals, sometimes with a pictogram alongside, 如, to cross a boundary, plus the enclosed social boundary, violating the social norm, which is humiliation. 关, a pictogram for a cap, the initial state, and the enclosed boundary, the cap that marks a child transitioning from their innocent state into social boundaries. And indeed, 关 is the cap that marked the coming of age in ancient China. Here is the important part. In 如, both components are abstract radicals, and neither is voiced. In 关, only yuan is voiced. So even though a majority of abstract radicals are voiced and thus phonetic, some abstract radicals are not phonetic in certain characters, while still contributing a stable meaning. Third, pictogram plus a pure phonetic. In a small set of characters, the second radical's original meaning is stripped away entirely. Only its sound remains, to spell a foreign word or an onomatopoeia. Cafe, coffee, the mouth radical carries the domain, the rest only spells the sound. The same mechanism was used to write Buddhism words into the Chinese script. Sen, the monk, and for, the Buddha. The person radical carries the domain. The rest only carries sound, spelling words from Sanskrit. Characters like these are a small class and mostly late arrivals in the history of the script. One more pattern completes the model. An abstract radical can build another radical, a composite abstract radical, and the composite radical builds a family of its own. Here are 3 composite abstract radicals, each built with an abstract radical inside. And here are the families they build. We won't walk through these derivations today. Each of these families deserves and will get its own video. In this final segment, let's return to the character we started with, mo itself. This is mo, as it was carved more than 3,000 years ago into turtle shells and bones, the so-called oracle bone form. Look at the oracle form, a sun in the middle and grass above and below it. The sun sinking into the grass, this is a sunset. And you can still trace the picture in the modern mo. The top and middle is still the grass and the sun, only the bottom has mutated away. So originally, mo meant exactly what the picture shows, dusk. It was the original written form of the dusk word, the same meaning that mo carries today. And here is how the meaning and usage of the mo character evolved. From the concrete scene, the sun veiled away at dusk, the abstract concept to cover was extracted out. This concrete origin, the scene an abstraction grew out of, is called the prototype. Then the meaning to cover was applied to various domains as the mo abstract radical was composed with different pictogram radicals. Applied back to the sun, it recreated the very scene it came from, mo, dusk, reconstructed. And applied to other domains, it built every other mo family character you have seen in this video. Notice what happened here. The word dusk was written in two different ways, once as a pure picture depicting a scene involving the sun, and once as an abstract operation applied to the sun. That second way is what gives the Chinese script its expressive power. A pure pictogram must draw a new picture for every situation, and picture with picture only occasionally composes. An abstract radical, in contrast, is productive. One more note. For most abstract radicals, their prototype, that original concrete scene, cannot be reliably reconstructed, and our method does not depend on prototype reconstruction to discover the meaning of abstract radicals. Mo happens to be an unusual case where its prototype can be easily reconstructed, and that is why I showed its prototype to you. In this channel's videos, we generally won't discuss prototypes for abstract radicals. At the beginning of this video, I said that when mo stands alone as a character, it means cannot. Standing alone, mo negates the verb that follows. The action cannot be done. In modern Chinese, this usage survives mostly inside set phrases. 莫名其妙, cannot name it. Something so strange that you cannot even say what it is. 一筹莫展, cannot proceed. Not a single move can be unfolded. 变幻莫测, cannot predict, shifting beyond prediction. So where does the negation sense come from? Well, from the veiled away sense we saw earlier. When something is veiled away, it is hidden, its potential unrealized. And from there, the negation. So mo's semantic evolution followed a logical path. First, a concrete scene, dusk, the sun veiled away. From the scene an abstract operation, to cover, and from to cover's veiled away sense, the potential unrealized, negation. One thing worth noting, the meaning of mo, the abstract radical, and the meaning of mo, the standalone character, are related, but they are not the same. The radical carries the more abstract meaning, to cover. The standalone meaning, cannot, is one specific sense that grew out of it. As we meet more abstract radicals in future videos, you will see this pattern again. The radical's meaning is the more abstract one, compared to the character's meaning when it stands alone. So this is how you should learn Chinese characters, the radical composition way, with the abstract radicals playing the central role. Remember the 10 characters from the beginning of this video? You did not learn them as unrelated characters, each memorized on its own. You learned the meaning and the pronunciation of an entire family of characters in one batch, and beneath them, the underlying logic of the Chinese language. If this video was helpful to you, please like and subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. See you in the next one.